Hello everyone, this is Jake Simpson, and I am making this video to break down the recent LUT reel that I made to demonstrate the LUT pack that I just released. I currently am recovering from COVID, so I sound awesome because it's been an awesome experience. So bear with me a little bit. This video is not going to be a tutorial like you can expect from later videos in this channel. But I am going to be just briefly kind of breaking down what I did with all of these clips. So I made this video to demonstrate what these LUTs could do. So we'll start from the beginning and jump right in. This first clip, very simple. All I did was bring down the saturation on the blues a little bit. This Osiris LUT is great. It does saturate the blues a bit. So if you don't like that, you can always just bring down the blues. But I love what this LUT does to the skin tones. As all of these LUTs, they were designed to prioritize the skin tones. They give you creative looks, but not at the sacrifice of skin tones. So I thought that looked great as it was. This next clip is with the M31 LUT. So the LUT gave you most of what is here. The only thing that I really did was warm the highlights a tad. As you can see here, this was the LUT itself, and then this is I just warmed the highlights with the primaries, and then I added some contrast before and after. The reason why I have a contrast node after is because most of these LUTs, similarly to how film works, they cool the shadows a little bit. So I wanted to keep the warmth of this shot, and so the contrast before is very subtle, but then the contrast after is what really gives it the punch, because I wanted the color from the LUT to stay warm. So the contrast after keeps those colors warm and keeps the colors that actually came from the LUT itself. So that's all that I did to the shot. This next shot is actually, I think, my least favorite on this reel, but the LUT itself did a lot of the work here. The shot itself just needed a bit of oomph to it. So I added a vignette and cooled kind of the edges of the frame just to lead your eye in, which was what we kind of intended on doing on set, but did not have the time. And then this middle, what's it called, power window, just kind of adds a bit of warmth to our subject here. And then I have a glow and a bit of balance where I just bring things down. But I actually think it looks a little bit better without the balance. But that's the shot. It's kind of just vignettes pointing you in, but the color itself all kind of came from the LUT. This shot needed a lot of contrast. It was quite flat straight out of camera. The LUT gives you some cool colors, but like contrast I added in before. I just did a massive contrast slide here, and then these following nodes are kind of just correcting what comes from adding that much contrast. So I took the highlights here in a qualifier and I just added a bit of orange to them using the primaries here just to kind of take the edge off so your eye doesn't stare right here, but you still kind of see our subject. And then I balanced things by bringing the highlights down a bit, again with the primaries. Primaries are awesome. And then the last node just adds a tad of a vignette so that your eye is kind of focused on the center of the frame. So with the LUT, wasn't bad, but with all these other adjustments, I feel like it just kind of comes together. This next shot is the most complex grade of the entire reel. I just applied the LUT to it, and I thought it looked good. This clip, same type of deal. The Osiris LUT is doing most of the heavy lifting. All I did was add a curve afterwards to kind of balance things out a little bit so the contrast wasn't quite so high. It's just a curve. Kind of brings down the saturation a tad, which I think is nice for this shot. So very simple grade here. This sunset shot, all this node before is doing is really adding a little bit extra warmth and contrast, but everything else is coming from this LUT. It's kind of just how, this is pretty much how it was in person. This LUT, or this clip here, is mainly just adjustments to the various exposures and colors that were kind of present in the scene that I didn't really like that much. So I added contrast because it was way too bright, but then since that took their skin tones down a lot, I did some power windows here, and I just brought up the shadows with a curve just so that way our characters here don't fade away into the background. And then these other two nodes are all just focused on the sky. This one, I used the highlight slider, which I think is great for when you want to bring highlights down but keep the detail. So I just brought the sky down a bit. I did use a qualifier, so it didn't affect their skin and the natural contrast in the scene. But I did bring down the sky, which was exactly what I wanted. And then I did the same thing here, but instead of highlights, I just brought down the saturation of the blues. Felt it stood out a little bit too much, was a little bit artificial. So this, I think, came together a bit more balanced. But the colors themselves, again, they're coming from the LUT. This 2383 emulation, I think, did justice for the shot. This next one, I actually would have been happy just leaving the shot as is with the LUT. I feel like it did most of what I wanted. The skin tones look great. The horse has a very subtle, warm kind of roll off into those highlights, which I really like. But these other nodes are just kind of accentuating what I wanted to bring out. So I have some contrast just to kind of remove the distraction of the background a little bit more. A balance node where I just used the offset to add some bit of warmth through the entire frame. And then an HSV node to bring down the saturation. In another video, I will explain why I used HSV. You just take a new node, and you convert the color space here to HSV, which is hue saturation value. And then you change the channels because if you think about it, it's very simple. HSV, the first channel is H, which is the hue. And then the third channel is V, which is value, which think of that as like the brightness of the color. So if you uncheck those two channels, then all this node is doing is acting on the saturation. So then if you play with the gain, you're actually playing with the saturation. And I think it just has a very, very nice effect on how it saturates and desaturates an image. So I have an HSV node here just to bring a little bit of the bite out of that saturation. I feel like it makes the skin tones just a bit more natural, a bit more neutral. And then this last node, all I did was bring down the highlights just to soften this frame a little bit. This next one, I actually, looking at this now, I think it's a bit pink, and I would have changed that, but I'll walk you through what I did. So the LUT is just the Osiris LUT. This is lit with some fluorescent tubes, actual fluorescent tubes, so they have pretty poor color rendition. So these nodes are kind of just trying to bring back that color in. I have an exposure node, contrast node, and then a skin tone qualifier where I just kind of wanted to bring out the skin tone, the warmth in it. So I qualified her skin, added a bit of warmth to the gain here, and then these next nodes are all focused on skin tones. So I did more qualifiers. This one is on her lower body, and I brought the levels on that down just a little bit so they weren't quite as distracting. Then on her face, I brought up the shadows a little bit. And then again, on her whole body, I brought up the mid-tone detail just to add some pop and really pull her off of that background. And then this last node is just, again, like the previous clips, to bring down a little bit of the bite from those highlights and balance things a little bit. But the actual look itself is definitely coming from this Osiris node, or Osiris LUT. It pulls those skin tones and it adds some blues to the neutral tones that I really, really like. And I think it worked well for this shot. But I would definitely add a little bit of green to it. Just make it slightly more neutral. I like that. This next one, I struggled with a bit actually. But the LUT itself, I think, did a good job of really just bringing out the warm tones in this. These other nodes are mainly just saturation and contrast adjustments. And then I had a node here to really warm those highlights, but I did not use it in the final video. Felt it was a little bit too much. This clip of my brother going through the woods is mainly driven by the LUT. I really like what the Davinci LUT does to green tones. It just warms up the kind of yellows and then brings the deep greens into a cooler kind of cast, and I really, really like that. So I just added a bit of exposure adjustment, and then I cooled down the greens with a qualifier. Very, very subtle, but I feel it just made him pop a little bit more, and then I added some contrast. Very simple grade on this shot. This one mimics that one. I just copied the graded over. It's the exact same clip, or exact same grade. This one, pretty much everything is coming from the LUT. Really, the only things these nodes are doing is contrast and saturation. So balance node I didn't even use actually. Contrast, I just brought down the shadows a little bit, give it a bit of punch, and then I have a sky layer and then an overall kind of curve just to bring down the harshness of that contrast. And then there's the LUT. This next clip, it was not shot on the red. This is one of two clips here that were not shot on the red. But it shows that you can adapt these LUTs to other cameras. Even though I will make a dedicated pack for other cameras, you still can do it if you need to. So this was shot on a Nikon. It's in Rec 709. My first node is just an IDT to transform it to what RedLog would be doing. It's just as similar as I could get it. Then I have the LUT, which gives it most of its look. These other nodes are just contrast and then playing around with the sky and more contrast. But I didn't even feel these last two are necessary. So this is kind of just the LUT and a bit of contrast to balance it. I love this clip. I shot this in the Czech Republic as part of a dancing video. But the LUT Valencia I feel like worked very well for this. I just kind of had to add some contrast and separate the stark difference between the highlights and the midtones. So this first contrast node is just brightening the shadows, and then I have another contrast node that's kind of bringing everything down. So between these two, you just get a bit softer of a blend between those highlights and the shadows. And then I have an HSV node just to increase that saturation a little bit, and then a greens node where I use a qualifier on the greens and just increase the saturation and the contrast a little bit there. But then that's most of the look. After the LUT, I have a highlights node where I just add a tad bit of color to those highlights. It just makes that transition even smoother. And then a vignette so that it pulls your eye into those dancers just a little bit more. And that's just a window with a curve adjustment. This shot, very, very, very similar. The LUT is giving you the main look, which I really like. I like these subtle transitions between the pinks and the warm tones on his skin. That's coming from the M31 LUT. Really, really like that. Added some contrast and warmth to those highlights just to really give this shot a bit of a summery feel. Then a mid-tone contrast with the curves. I have a skin tone qualifier. This just adds a little bit of pink to his skin. I tend to like my skin tones going slightly pink over slightly yellow. I like them on the line, but if I had to choose between pink and yellow, I would have them go a little bit more pink. So that's what this node is doing, is it's just a skin tone qualifier, and I reduced a little bit of the green in the highlights. And then I have a shadows node that's just bringing up back here these shadows, pulling them just a little bit. I don't know if you could see that. It's very, very subtle, but I felt it just kind of added a bit to the dynamic range of the shot. Then I have a balance node where I kind of bring everything down into those shadows so it would cool off just a little bit. And then a vignette so that the punch from these bright areas of the frame is brought down a little bit and you focus on our actors. Then here, this shot, again, not shot on the red. This is the only other clip. So the first node is just to bring it into log. Then I have the LUT, and then these other nodes are just to add warmth to the highlights and then to add pink back into those skin tones. And then I have a balance node at the end. Again, just bringing down those highlights, kind of helping it to soften up a little bit. Next frame. I'm not going to talk about this one that much because most of these adjustments were very hastily done. So I essentially have the LUT and then an IDT node right before it because I do so many adjustments that basically bring it to Rec 709. And so I pull it from Rec 709 back to RedLog, as odd as that sounds. This was very counterintuitive, but I was really struggling with how to bring out the colors the way I wanted them. So most of these nodes, as I piece them together, you'll see are just adding contrast in areas. They're small power windows, adding warmth. These all were just put together kind of as if I was editing in Photoshop, just layers and layers and layers, trying to make this look like it was a sunset when really it was just kind of a midday shot that we ND'd down like crazy. But I think it came out really nice. This shot here is a lot of just contrast and saturation. So here's just the LUT. This is the Valencia LUT. And then these nodes before are just adding contrast. I wanted this guy to kind of come out of the dark. So this contrast is just hiding him a bit, bringing down the overall image. Then I have an HSV node to desaturate it just a tad. I have a skin tone node to once again pump a little bit of pink into those skin tones. And then a node that's isolating the greens here, and I just put some saturation into those greens. But that's it. Otherwise, it was all just the LUT, giving it these colors and these skin tones. These next two clips were quite difficult to work with. The colors here are very desaturated and pale because I had a glimmer glass filter on the lens, and also this is the tail end of summer, so these leaves were almost a desaturated green color. It just didn't really pop the way that I wanted it to. So these LUTs are all just aimed at bringing out the saturation and contrast that this filter kind of reduced. So I have some curves, I have HSV nodes, a skin tone node. This one is just to add some pop to the skin tones. So I have mid-tone detail here. I did qualify his skin tones and just put a bit of an S-curve. I feel that just makes it pop a little bit more. Then these nodes here are a vignette, another greens node, just to kind of saturate those greens, and then more saturation. And then this final node is another saturation node for the greens. So most of these adjustments were just to try to fix those greens and fix the contrast, but that's just kind of how it was out of camera, sadly. Same with the shot. It was very, very similar. Without anything, it was from the nut or the LUT. So with the LUT, it kind of just was bland to me. Not because of the LUT, but because this filter just reduced that contrast like crazy. It added a bit of blue to the shadows that I didn't like. You can see down here on the waveform that the shadows are really, really high in the blue channel. So all of these nodes really are just designed to kind of pull the blue out of those shadows, add a bit of warmth back into the image, and bring the attention to our main character here and make the greens a bit more balanced. So sorry, I'm going through these ones really quick. Again, I'm trying to make sure that this video is not 2 years long. So I'm just skimming through to show you how I got these results. But most of these nodes are just kind of played by ear. And I was just trying to bring out the colors that I liked. So I like these greens a lot. I don't like these kind of tealish greens. So I'm selecting them with power windows, and I'm reducing the blues, just going into the gain in the different primaries here and pulling blue out of it. So that way it goes more to those warm tones. And then overall, I don't think it turned out that bad. This last node is just a contrast node to make things kind of pop a bit more. This clip, very, very simple. Pretty much everything came from the LUT itself. All I did with these was balance to remove a bit of the green, and then a curve just to soften that image a little bit. And then the LUT itself was a little bit strong, so I just brought it down in the key tab. So you can see a difference here as I wipe the LUT on and off. I just kind of brought it down a little bit just so that way it was not quite so intense. I wanted this to be a bit more desaturated. This next clip, very similar to the earlier bar shot. It's just the LUT itself. I don't know why it's not labeled. Oh, here we go. That's why. So this was just the M31 LUT, and then I added some contrast to really just make things pop and increase that separation. This clip, a lot of it came from the LUT itself and the lighting. We had some tungsten lights out there, but these nodes are just meant to kind of accentuate the warmth from those lights and really just make it vibrant. But the look itself came from the lighting in that LUT. And here, this clip, the LUT itself, and then I added a bit of contrast, bit of saturation, and then I have a highlights node here where I just used the luminance qualifier, selected the highlights of the image, just brought those down a little bit with curves. I felt they were popping a little bit too much and distracting from the characters, so just brought that down a little bit. This clip's primary adjustments were to the warm tones and kind of pulling those out. So the initial shot was done in the evening and it was becoming blue hour and it was shot at a high ISO. So I added some noise reduction, and then to balance that, I added sharpening at the end. So noise reduction at the very beginning, sharpening at the end, LUT right there in the middle, and then the nodes surrounding the LUT were primarily just to warm up the shot a bit. So I used the primary wheels, a little bit of the curves, just to bring out those warm tones and make it look like it's sunset instead of blue hour. Same with this node that's after the LUT. It's just bringing out those warm tones. And then I have a glow in there just to accentuate a little bit of the color. You can see before, after. It almost just saturates things a little bit, just makes them a little bit more glowy. But that's basically it for this shot, just warming it up. This last clip is mostly the LUT. These two nodes are just adding a bit of contrast and then adding a bit of saturation. I keyed the greens here because I didn't really want the reds to oversaturate, but I brought out those greens a bit, and the rest of it is just coming from that LUT. So that's it. Thank you all so much for watching. This video really was a sprint, but in the upcoming videos I will be making tutorials on proper node trees. These were kind of abnormal a little bit, but I'll be showing proper node trees. I'll be showing more grading, more in-depth, and we'll actually grade things together. But this was mainly to demonstrate the LUTs, what you can do with them, and how you can kind of tweak them for your own projects and what potential they have. They were made to be kind of an out-of-the-box look, but they still leave plenty of room for creative tweaks, and you can really make your own style with these. So again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.